September 11, 2001 marks a pivotal moment in history, dividing life into before and after the terrorist attacks. On that bright sunny morning, nearly 3,000 Americans perished when two hijacked planes crashed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City. Another struck the Pentagon, and a fourth was brought down in Pennsylvania filled by courageous passengers who resisted the terrorist. This unprecedented attack was the largest ever on U.S. soil by a foreign entity, creating a national wave of fear, grief, and outrage. Americans looked to their leaders for decisive action, leading Congress and the White House to dramatically expand military, law enforcement, and intelligence capabilities to fight terrorism, both at home and abroad. These actions, while enhancing security, also raised significant concerns about human rights abuses. So let's explore the aftermath 9/11 and how it transformed America. And without further ado, let's dive in. Less than a month after 9/11, US troops invaded Afghanistan to dismantle Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group responsible for the attacks, and to overthrow the Taliban government that sheltered them. 2 years later, in March 2003, the United States invaded Iraq to depose President Saddam Hussein. Although Hussein was not directly linked to the 9/11 attacks, he was suspected of developing weapons of mass destruction, which were never found. This invasion became a central element of President George W. Bush's war on terror. The military campaign in Afghanistan, which concluded disastrously with the Taliban regaining control, became the longest war in American history. In December 2011, the remaining U.S. troops withdrew from Iraq, leaving the country in a more unstable condition than when the invasion began in 2003. In the past 2 decades, millions of young U.S. soldiers have been deployed overseas, with thousands losing their lives and many returning home with severe physical and mental injuries. According to the U.S. Department of Defense, approximately 7,000 American troops have been killed in Afghanistan and Iraq since the start of the post-9/11 military operations. However, this number represents only a fraction of the total casualties, which include hundreds of thousands of Iraqi and Afghan civilians, as well as contractors, journalists, allied troops, and opposition fighters. Additionally, many more soldiers have returned home physically unharmed but suffer from debilitating long-term mental health issues such as PTSD, depression, and psychological conditions linked to traumatic brain injury. And tragically, thousands of veterans from these conflicts end up taking their own lives. Now, one of the most alarming aspects of the 9/11 attacks was the fact that 19 Al-Qaeda hijackers not only managed to board commercial aircraft with primitive weapons, but also gained access to the cockpit. This highlighted a glaring failure in America's intelligence system to identify the attackers and in airport security measures to prevent such breaches. Despite previous high-profile hijackings and bombings of commercial planes, such as the tragic 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, airline security was not a top priority before 9/11. Airports had security departments and employees wore badges and did screenings, but none of them were nearly at the level of what we see today. Before 9/11, airport security was significantly laxer compared to today. People could freely roam around the airport and wait at the gate without a ticket, and there were no ID checks before boarding the plane. The only thing passengers had to remove at security was loose change from their pockets. Additionally, most airports didn't conduct background checks on their employees and checked baggage was not scanned. However, all of this changed with the establishment of the Transportation Security Administration, a new federal agency authorized by Congress in November 2001. It was an extraordinary undertaking. They built the ultimate aviation security system from the ground up. Within a year, TSA had amassed well over 50,000 employees. In addition to deploying a large team of blue uniform screeners, the TSA introduced extensive new security measures for U.S. travelers. Now tickets and photo IDs have become mandatory for passing through the screening area. Passengers had to remove laptop computers and electronics from their carry-on bags, take off their shoes, and adhere to a limit of 3-ounce containers for liquids. Conventional X-ray machines, which only detected metal objects, were gradually replaced with full-body scanners. Moreover, TSA officers received training in behavior detection to identify suspicious actions such as tightly gripping baggage, appearing confused and disoriented, or displaying signs of agitation. These behaviors could trigger additional screening for the traveler. Behind the scenes, the FBI's new terrorist screening center maintained a terrorist watch list containing hundreds of thousands of individuals, including around 6,000 plays on a no-fly list, which also included several Americans. Then just 4 days after the 9/11 attacks, something happened. You see, a gunman in Mesa, Arizona, unleashed a shooting spree. His first victim was Balbir Singh Sodhi, a gas station owner of Indian descent who wore a turban as part of his Sikh faith. Mistakenly assuming Sodhi was Muslim, the gunman fatally shot him. Shortly after, the gunman targeted another gas station clerk of Lebanese descent, but missed. He then fired shots at the windows of an Afghan-American family. Despite repeated assurances from politicians and law enforcement that Islam is a peaceful religion, with its true teachings distorted by terrorist extremists, many individuals in America and worldwide continue to associate the 9/11 attacks with Islam. This led to acts of vengeance against anyone perceived to be Muslim, even based solely on appearance. In the year 2000, the FBI received reports of only 12 anti-Muslim assaults. However, following the events of 9/11 in 2001, this number surged to 93. Despite criticism from civil liberties organizations regarding racial profiling by the TSA and law enforcement targeting Arab and Muslim men, hate crimes against Muslims continue to occur. FBI statistics indicate that in 2015, there were 91 reported assaults driven by anti-Muslim bias. Shockingly, by 2016, this figure exceeded the number reported in 2001, reaching 127 incidents. So later on, surveillance increased as the Patriot Act was passed a mere 6 weeks after 9/11. It is a response to the intelligence failures that allowed known terrorists to carry out the deadliest plot in American history. This controversial legislation brought about sweeping changes in how domestic intelligence agencies like the FBI conducted surveillance. In the name of national security, long-standing rules aimed at protecting Americans from unreasonable search and seizure were relaxed or discarded. The prevailing fear was that the 9/11 attacks were just a beginning, with more terrorist cells potentially active in American cities and awaiting orders to strike. To identify these terrorists among us, Congress granted the FBI and NSA expanded authority to collect and share data. For instance, the Patriot Act empowered intelligence agencies to scrutinize an individual's library records and internet search history with minimal judicial oversight. Agents gained the ability to search homes without notifying the owner and to wiretap phone lines without establishing probable cause. As civil liberties groups pushed back against what they deemed unconstitutional privacy violations under the Patriot Act, an even more contentious law emerged in 2008, the FISA Amendment Act. This legislation granted the NSA extensive powers to monitor American phone calls, text messages, and emails with minimal oversight, all under the guise of targeting foreign nationals suspected of terrorism. Then we had the increase in immigration and deportation. In 2002, the Bush administration established the Department of Homeland Security, elevating it to a cabinet-level office by merging 22 government agencies. Among these, the Immigration and Naturalization Service and the U.S. Customs Service, formerly under the Department of Justice, were amalgamated into the newly formed U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This agency has overseen a significant increase in deportations, nearly doubling since 9/11. According to the Department of Homeland Security's Yearbook of Immigration Statistics, there were approximately 200,000 annual deportations between 1999 and 2001. Although the number dipped slightly in 2002, it began to steadily rise in the subsequent years. During the initial 2 years of the Obama administration, 2009 to 2010, deportations reached a peak, totaling nearly 400,000 annually. About half of those deported during this period had been convicted of a criminal offense, primarily low-level, non-violent crimes. The Secure Communities program, initiated in 2008 and formally discontinued in 2014, enabled local law enforcement to verify the immigration status of every individual booked in a country or a local jail. This included individuals who were not ultimately convicted of a crime, achieved by cross-referencing fingerprints with federal immigration records. The program often led to instances where undocumented immigrants faced deportation proceedings for minor infractions, such as failures to use turn signal while driving. By 2014, when President Barack Obama announced plans to phase out the program, ICE had established secure communities partnerships with every law enforcement jurisdiction in the nation, totaling 3,181. Americans now became safer, but something changed. In the years following 9/11, individuals inspired by jihadist ideology have carried out domestic terrorist attacks, resulting in the deaths of 107 people as of April 2024. However, nearly half of these fatalities occurred during a tragic shooting of the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Contrary to fears of large-scale terrorist attacks on U.S. cities following September 11th, such events have not materialized. The security measures implemented after 9/11 seem to have thwarted or dissuaded another large-scale plot by foreign actors on American soil. However, in the process, the nation has been engaged in an eternal war on terror, fundamentally reshaping the landscape of American life. So, what are your thoughts on the aftermath of 9/11? Share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more insightful content.